I'm Pep Watson, this is Crime and Justice TV, and this is the Crime and Justice TV Weekly Bulletin. This week on the Crime and Justice TV Weekly Bulletin, Pressure Movement, the National Family Action Alliance, has this week released exclusive footage only to Crime and Justice TV of the Pressure Movement challenging modern-day barbarian IPP killer, Justice Secretary of State David Gork, on the ongoing rising death toll attributed to the banned and barbaric IPP sentence. Also this week, Crime and Justice TV uncovers endemic state-sponsored corruption within the National Probation Service, the Parole Board for England and Wales, and with the Health Care Professionals Council, and within the Justice Select Committee led by Tory MP Bob Neill. Also this week, a man is in custody on attempted murder charges over a series of random stabbings in the Edmonton area of North London, UK. This week's top story. Grassroots Pressure Movement, the National Family Action Alliance, has this week released footage of the Pressure Movement challenging modern-day barbarian IPP killer, Lord Chancellor Secretary of State for Justice, the Right Honourable David Gork. Veteran IPP campaigner Shirley De Bono can be observed in the footage challenging the Justice Secretary on the staggering, alarming death toll attributed to the banned and barbaric Strasbourg-condemned IPP sentence. At the time of the said challenge, the Justice Secretary was lauding in state-sponsored illegitimate propaganda, praising his staff in the prison estate on how hard they are working to change people's lives, whilst at the same time near 2,500 IPP prisoners, 90% of which are over tariff, serving banned IPP sentences, are self-harming due to catastrophic breakdown in mental functioning attributed to the barbaric nature of post-tariff IPP imprisonment. IPP campaigner Shirley De Bono challenges the Justice Secretary on the fact that vulnerable short tariff IPP prisoners with learning difficulties are slowly dying in prison healthcare units all over England and Wales, 10 years over tariff, detained for crimes such as attempted robbery of a coat or a mobile phone, or for setting fire to a prison mattress. Shirley De Bono challenges Gork on the fact that these IPP prisoners detained now for 13 years are skinny, grey, gaunt, malnourished, suffering catastrophic delirium, and so are using rusty prison razor blades to carve chunks out of their wrists, arms, legs, throats, faces and genitals, and throwing chunks of their skin at the walls of their prison cells, where they are dying in a manner not seen since Nazi death camps in Nazi Germany, and in a manner not dissimilar to the manner in which men, women and children die within prisons of rogue state nations such as Camp 22 in North Korea. In response to the challenge, modern-day IPP barbarian killer Justice Secretary David Gork showed no emotion.
Sally, and thank you for reminding me of my own time inside. And also interested that you raised what is collective now for cabinet lists as well. I'm going to discourage any audience participation. I don't want you all shouting out your own ideas. I'd like to also thank the Kessler Trust for inviting me here today, and I'm delighted that you've been able to come back to the South Bank Centre for the 11th year to exhibit some of the thousands of entries to this year's Kessler Awards. And I'd like to congratulate all the winners and everyone who entered. One of the great privileges and being the Justice Secretary, is getting to...
Can I just stop you there a minute, baby, and just read this off?
My
name's
We're here to talk about IPP.
My name's Shirley Bono. I'm here to discuss the artwork IPP prisoners locked up in limbo through the tariff are creating in their cells. It's simply from the horror movie. They slice the flesh off their hands and legs and throw it on the walls. They throw their excrement all over the walls. They splatter blood onto the walls. They don't do this for fun. They do it because they want...
Let the lady talk. We're here in peace. We're talking about IPP.
They do it because they are gone insane. There is no proper mental health care. 18-year-olds locked up in 2005 for 2-year tariff. Still inside today.
Biggest and worst mass miscarriage of justice in modern British criminal justice history and anywhere else in Western Europe.
The children of disciples and prisoners are suffering too. So babies having to travel to prison.
All right. Lord Chancellor, will you talk to us about
I've been
IPP?
trying for 10 years to meet a justice minister, and today is the only day that I can do it, David. I ask one thing of you, with such follies people. Please, I am a complaint of the IPP. You have heard of me, I've met with Lord Duncan. All I want is to be able to have a meeting with you, with Francis Cook, with Lord Duncan, with you in the month of November. Please say yes or no.
We're here to talk about IPP. I'm not going to stop filming.
This is not the position.
It's
This is not the place.
Yes,
all right.
It's no time to speak to him. Just a yes or a no, David. It's a serious thing. There's IPP prisoners having a play market for targeting.
Right, let him talk, Shirley. Will you talk to us about IPP, David, please?
I've got to leave shortly after this, but I'll come and speak to you briefly, if I may carry on, because there's really important work.
Okay, I appreciate that.
In other footage released by grassroots pressure movement, the National Family Action Alliance, one can observe the pressure movement again challenging an emotionless David Gork on the sickening IPP death toll at an event, the Kessler Awards, which shows again the upper class, predominantly white, top tier staffing systems which decide on who lives or dies on an IPP sentence.
Sorry, you can't film other people. I can film. I can film. Take your hands off me, please. Why can't I film?
You film yourself, you just can't
There's
film
people
other people.
dying.
You can't film other
Short
people on
tariff
this side.
autistic IPP prisoners, okay, are cutting their throats and bleeding out in draconian Victorian prison cells, yeah? His prison cells, the Justice Secretary's prison cells. It's a crime against humanity. It's a modern day massacre. It's the biggest and worst mass miscarriage of justice in modern British criminal justice history and probably anywhere else in Western Europe. It's a stain on the criminal justice system in the British judiciary. I just wanted to comment for him on behalf of all the families of all the IPPs that are dying and the ones who have died. Thousands of IPP prisoners remain detained indefinitely with no release dates for minor crimes, okay? Major loss of life is attributed to IPP. The death toll is frighteningly high. The death toll way surpassed that of Bloody Sunday by 2010. That's nearly a decade ago. The death toll is worse than that of Hillsborough and Grenfell Tower, okay? How is this possible in the 21st century in modern Britain? How is it possible?
I cannot answer this question, my friend. I'm just saying.
I'm the author of this polemic, IPP the Trilogy, the mass mental slaughter of the disappeared. It's been recognised by your organisation, the Kessler, okay?
That's my
Okay. Okay, well this has been you've commended this bit of work.
I know, and
You've commended it.
I came up and was trying to have a gentle conversation with you.
Uh-huh.
And about what the issues were. And
People are dying and we want answers, okay? And I want an apology from the Secretary of State for my daughter, who's grown up for 12, 13 years without me, okay? And I'm demanding the executive release of Sean Thomas, who's in his 13th year of IPP indefinite detention as of the 28th of June this year on a 2-year, 11-month tariff. He's got a speech impediment, autistic, partial deafness. It is horrific what is happening to these people. Absolutely horrific. These short tariff, post-tariff IPPs are detained indefinitely for no other reason than conditions such as autism, dyslexia, learning difficulties, speech impediments and deafness, for no other reason. No other reason. And the crooked media, wherever they were a minute ago, The Sun, the Daily Mail, keep demonising IPPs. The majority of IPPs are not dangerous. The majority of IPPs are not John Wall boys.
You know what
It's just
my
recording. I
point
can't
was.
speak for you, I can't speak for the BBC, I can't speak for all I can speak for. If you want to film on site, there's just procedures to go along that. That's
Okay.
all I want to talk to you about.
Well, Justice will...
Because it's just safeguarding issues, and if you're going to get other people involved, they need to sign a release. That was all I'm talking to you.
Well, sue me.
I can appreciate the fact
Sue
that
me.
No one wants to
Sue me. We're not going to give up. We're not going to give up. My name's Pepsi Watson. Google me. Look me up on Twitter. Pepsi Watson. No, I'm not putting it down, Shirley. He's up there giving speeches about rehabilitation.
you're angry at the-
You haven't got the slightest idea what's going on in our prisons at the minute.
You're angry at the wrong person because it's a personal trust. We're trying to support people too.
IPP is the worst human rights abuses, okay, in modern British
And
politics.
through the Cursor Trust.
So, have you got a comment for the short tariff, post-tariff IPPs who are between 8 and 11 years over tariff, who are
No comment. It's not within
suffering
my
delirium
remit.
and insanity and dying in our prison system at the moment? Have you got a comment for them?
Where's your friend?
You don't have a comment?
Because
I don't need to. I'm a political activist. I'm fighting for the voiceless.
I understand that.
The
But
fight
then
against the
if you want to talk South Bank and film, that's just our policy.
The fight against the injustice of IPP is not about over-prison population. The fight against the injustice is about freedom from discrimination, individual liberty, justice, fairness, and truth. The dangerousness renaissance, okay, and the cost is an ocean of blood, okay. 5 successive justice secretaries have an ocean of blood on their hands. Shame on Tony Blair, shame on Jack Straw, and shame on David Blunkett. Because these are the guys that implemented this barbaric, evil, cruel, dehumanising IPP sentence into the criminal justice system, and tens of thousands of families and children are suffering immeasurable trauma, okay, because of this IPP sentence.
I understand it.
I understand your position. I appreciate your position, but I'm never going to give up.
And
Okay?
I'm
never
not
going to
asking
give up.
you with respect.
Okay?
All I'm
Justice
asking
will be
is
done.
just recording on site.
Justice will be seen to be done.
Hopefully
Okay,
so.
we will never surrender on this. Never ever surrender. Okay, we are the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Okay, the marginalised and the vulnerable and the weak have been suppressed for so long, so many years, and it's a generation of children that are being affected. Okay, so we're going to rise up. We will never surrender, and justice will be done and will be seen to be done.
Honestly, mate,
Okay?
hopefully so.
The National Family Action Alliance are a grassroots pressure movement which engages high-level establishment figures on the disgusting injustice and death toll attributed to the worst and cruelest act of unparalleled barbarism, paralleled by nothing similar in modern European political or criminal justice history, a barbarism inflicted by the current Tory British government against their own people, IPP. In these exclusive only to Crime and Justice TV images obtained by Crime and Justice TV via the Freedom of Information Act, one can observe scores and scores and scores and scores of preventable IPP deaths occurring in Category A, B and C prisons all over England and Wales. In the images, one can observe the frightening, shocking, alarming and staggering ongoing rising death toll attributed to the banned, barbaric and utterly indefensible, despicable IPP sentence. Scores and scores of men, women and teenagers have endured and continue to endure horrific mental health breakdown and are dying slow deaths in David Gauke's Victorian and draconian prison cells. These people are then zipped up in body bags, thrown in the back of white vans like pieces of meat, then driven to the morgue, and the prisons do not even contact close family members for days and in some cases weeks. All ongoing rising IPP deaths are categorically and emphatically
an accepted political collateral damage in Tory leader Theresa May, Justice Secretary David Gauke and Prisons Minister Rory Stewart maintaining their power in Parliament and in pursuing their own self-seeking political agendas.
Also in this week's news, Crime and Justice TV have uncovered shocking and chilling endemic discriminatory methods of risk assessments carried out by senior National Probation Service probation officers of vulnerable short tariff post-tariff IPP prisoners serving banned IPP prison sentences.
In these Twitter images, in a Twitter feed kicked off recently on Twitter by legal and policy consultant, parole specialist and director of SL5 Legal, Andrew Sperling, one can observe the Twitter feed written by Andrew commenting on an IPP shocking case of a man who received an IPP sentence with a 4-year tariff, who then went on to endure multiple back-to-back parole board knockbacks due to the barbaric nature of the IPP sentence. The prisoner in question, despite only receiving a 4-year tariff, went on to serve 12 years. When the parole board directed his release for outstanding conduct and behaviour within the prison estate, the IPP prisoner was recalled to custody after only 2 days for failing to turn up at the probation hostel because instead he had decided to go out drinking and enjoy a night out before going to the hostel. The prisoner in question was then recalled to custody indefinitely and had to wait 5 months for another parole hearing. During this time, the IPP prisoner's son was murdered. Andrew Sperling is adamant that prior to the John Warboy saga, that this IPP prisoner would have been released without the need for an oral hearing. Shockingly, within this Twitter feed, a senior probation officer at Luton, who was a former magistrate, responded in a shocking and chilling manner, exposing endemic discriminatory bias within risk assessments of short tariff, post-tariff vulnerable IPP prisoners with learning difficulties serving banned and controversial and indefensible, despicable IPP sentences. Within the Twitter feed, after these shocking revelations from the senior probation officer, there was, understandably, utter outrage, shock and horror at the tweets from the senior probation officer. We can see now the tweet in question from the senior probation officer with the Twitter account @Jane. In the tweet, she states the IPP sentence was used too frequently by courts, which is just simply not the case, for Tony Blair wanted to give the IPP sentence to 25,000 people. We can see in Jane's response here within the thread, a chilling response where she states she has no sympathy for the IPP in question, whose son had just recently been murdered.
After this shocking revelation of modern-day state-sponsored National Probation Service barbarism, Crime and Justice TV investigated further. How is this shocking revelation materialising into practice on the front line in prisons for short tariff IPPs being assessed by probation officers displaying these endemic, chilling, barbarous attitudes?
In these exclusive Crime and Justice TV images of an Oasis risk assessment completed by a veteran 25-year probation office professional of an IPP who had been recalled after 6 years in the community for failing a drug test. In the Oasis risk assessment completed post-recall, one can observe the offender manager writing, in August he started to address the relapse, and provided some clean drug tests. In the next image, we can see in the middle section where the pink highlighter is blank, another veteran probation officer who is now managing the case had removed this evidence. In this image completed by the first probation officer, the probation officer states he has commenced one-to-one sessions with the local drug team. And in this image we can again see the first probation officer in his report post-recall. He has recently started one-to-one sessions with the local drug team, again backed up here with a Freedom of Information request from the above-mentioned drug community agency, documenting numerous attendances. In this image, one can observe from the first probation officer that indicate the work carried out so far section states, while in custody, the IPP completed a range of offender behaviour courses including ETS, PASRO, victim awareness, carrots, future training course, IT, education, etc., etc. Yet in the later risk assessment Oasis completed by the second offender manager, this evidence was removed and replaced with, since his last review, the person, the IPP, has completed in-cell low-level Phoenix Futures work and smart recovery, again removing evidence. In this exclusive Oasis risk assessment image, the first probation officer states awareness of his own criminogenic needs and motivation for offending, yet this was removed by the second probation officer and changed to awareness of his own vulnerability around substance misuse. The first offender manager had managed this IPP for 6 years. In contrast, the second offender manager, who was responsible for removing numerous evidences of risk reduction work completed over a 12-year period since the person in question had received the IPP sentence, as well as inflating risk of harm illegally and corruptly with no evidence to back up the fact, had never even met the IPP. Alarmingly, all the previous shown images in this breathtaking expose of state-sponsored National Probation Service corruption all the evidence of the IPP in question responding to the relapse in the community via engaging with the community Bournemouth drug beat team had been removed by the second offender manager in the Oasis risk assessment, therefore inflating the risk of serious harm to the public. We can see in the pink highlighted text at the bottom of your screen that the second offender manager, having removed all the evidence of the IPP in question, fully engaging with the Bournemouth beat team post-relapse in the community, stating during that time he, the IPP, had made minimal effort to engage with local drug services and repeatedly withheld information from his OM about his drug problem, and this is despite the IPP in question passing 25 clean drug tests. Detailed, thorough and comprehensive complaints were made to senior probation officers at the National Probation Service by this IPP prisoner, and these complaints were ignored. 27-year veteran probation and prison service worker Vivian Clayton told Crime and Justice TV that removing evidence on a scale such as this in this breathtaking Crime and Justice TV expose is gross misconduct, malpractice and corruption. So, while the experienced offender manager in question was busy inflating the risk of serious harm of the IPP in question, whilst at the same time diluting all evidence of positive risk reduction work completed in a 12-year period, how was the IPP in question spending his entire 2 years on recall in the prison? In this first image, one can observe the prisoner having difficulties in getting positive risk reduction work into the parole dossier for the parole hearing. In this image, one can observe that the prisoner is struggling to obtain the parole dossier in order to plan for the parole hearing. In this image, the prisoner is asking again for a drug test to prove reduction in risk, to no avail. In this image, one can observe the prisoner fighting to gain education within a chaotic prison ravaged with a drug epidemic. The prisoner's repeat applications were ignored. In this image, the prisoner is pursuing actively restorative justice programs, only again to be ignored. The prisoner wanted to meet the victim to prove reduction in risk and show maturity, but was ignored. In this image, the prisoner is observed pursuing residential rehab options to show that he has the skills to plan appropriately for his eventual release if the parole board directed his release back into the community. At the time, there was rioting in the prison. In this image, the prisoner is observed being proactive in pursuing voluntary mentoring positions in the chapel on the Sycamore Tree program. In this image, we can see that the prisoner was successful in actively pursuing funding to continue with his degree with the Open University. This was at a time of widespread chaos, rioting and Trojan squads entering the prison. In this image, again, we see a positive, proactive attitude from the prisoner in pursuing educational opportunities. In this image, we again see that the prisoner is constantly ignored during a time when other IPPs are slicing up their necks, throats, arms and legs and comatose off Black Mamba Spice, while the prisoner in question is pursuing restorative justice to reduce his risk. In this image, we again see the prisoner in question pleading for drug tests to prove he is clean, to prove his risk has reduced, to no avail. In this image, we can see that the prisoner is asking again and again and again to be assessed for Phoenix Futures workshops on Mondays, but is ignored. In this image, the prisoner articulates poor mental health attributed to the post-tariff IPP detention, where he says he is isolated from family and asked to go to a different prison, but is ignored. Again, we can see a proactive attitude in the prisoner pursuing Saints for Sports program in the prison, but is ignored whilst determinate sentence prisoners who came into the prison after this prisoner were enrolled on the program. In this image, we can see that the prisoner is asking numerous times for his OASIS risk assessment to prepare for his parole hearing, but instead of being given the 65-page document, was instead given a 40-page document and then was ignored. In this image, the prisoner asks for 12-step share CDs to help him with recovery in a prison with a crack cocaine epidemic, a heroin epidemic, and a spice Black Mamba epidemic. The governor refused the request. In this image, again we see the prisoner pleading for a drug test to reduce risk factors and prove reduction in risk, but again is ignored. In this image, we see that the prisoner has made complaints to Professor Nick Hardwick, who was running the parole board at the time, but these constant repeat requests to follow up the complaint in question to Nick Hardwick was ignored. In this image, we see the prisoner in question pursuing his offender supervisor within the prison to sign his Kessler Awards mentor application form, as it required signing to pursue and finalise, but the prisoner in question was ignored by the offender supervisor and the mentoring application therefore did not go ahead. In this image, we can see that the prisoner, increasingly frustrated and becoming suicidal, pursued avenues of writing detailed complaints to his MP, Tobias Elwood, about the parole delays, but was unsuccessful as Tobias MP was not helpful. And in this image, we can again see that at the time, for the prisoner in question, there was non-stop riots in the prison, chaos, a drug epidemic, and the prisoner at this time became extremely suicidal and wanted to die from hopelessness. In this image, we can see that the prisoner in question was further isolated from friends and family and his solicitor because the prison were taking up to 3 months to add numbers to the prisoner's PIN phone so he could phone people to help him with his case. In this image, we can see that legal documents sent to the prisoner had vanished and were not received by the prisoner and had been given to other prisoners on other wings. This mail problem was endemic within the prison. In this image, we can see that complaints completed by the prisoner in question against the prison psychologist had gone missing and nobody had responded to the said complaints. Again, this problem was endemic within the prison for IPPs. In this image, again, we can see that the prisoner is pursuing applications because the prison were refusing and would not add solicitor phone numbers and numbers of friends to the prisoner's PIN phone. So during this time, let's take a glance at the progress of this prisoner. 27 weeks of smart recovery and discussing relationships, emotions and addiction. 25 one-to-ones with a drug worker. Attendance at all Phoenix Futures drug groups. Enhanced status, proactive in building support for release, Stonebridge distance learning, counselling and addiction course completed, secured funding to continue with degree, studying 70 to 20 hours a week in the prison, completion of the Sycamore Tree Victim Awareness course for the 3rd time, Sycamore Tree mentoring on 3 further programs, proactive in engaging with restorative justice, arranging to meet the victim of the crime, Spurgeon's parenting program success, Spurgeon's relationships program success, Certificate of Excellence from the Kessler Awards for an essay on rehabilitation totaling 10,000 words, 2nd place in annual Perry Lectures essay competition, and other successes, as well as outstanding reports from wing staff and outstanding reports from prison staff who had been working in prisons for nearly 30 years. All wing reports from experienced veteran officers and staff commended the IPP on all progress and positive risk reduction work completed during the 2 years in an extreme environment where chaos, rioting, a drug epidemic and a mental health epidemic, as well as multiple suicides, were occurring regularly. Yet, frighteningly and alarmingly, we can see in these images that the offender manager responsible for diluting risk reduction work whilst inflating risk of harm to the community during this 2-year period at several intervals consistently increased the risk of harm to the public of the prisoner. This problem is representative of the wider spectrum and is endemic across the entire IPP population estate. Therefore, it is little wonder that IPPs are suffering catastrophic breakdown in mental functioning. In this image taken from an Oasis risk assessment completed by the offender manager, he does not recommend release and does not recommend progress to a lower category prison, despite all risk reduction work completed, which was never updated into the Oasis. And in this shocking image, the said offender manager probation officer assesses the IPP in question as an imminent threat to life and limb. It is little wonder that the IPP death toll is rising and rising and rising month on month on month, leaving behind a lifetime of trauma for families. Crime and Justice TV used the full extent and full force of the resources available to Crime and Justice TV to investigate this corruption further and to understand the psychological makeup of the men and or women who are managing these IPP prisoners, and what we found was mind-blowing. Crime and Justice TV has uncovered letters sent from an existing National Probation Service probation officer responsible for the management of short tariff, post tariff IPP prisoners with learning difficulties enduring catastrophic breakdown in mental functioning. In the letters written to an IPP prisoner from the offender manager in question, she tells the IPP prisoner, who was vulnerable at the time because he was going through intense therapy, that she loves him. Crime and Justice TV has been given dozens of these letters. In this letter, the female probation officer says to the vulnerable short tariff IPP, "Spank me, treat me like your dirty slut whore, hurt me, you'll know I'm loving it when I start whining and crying, make me all sweaty and juicy, please me, tease me, wind me up, make me beg for it, put me on my knees in front of you, make me eat your cum, smear it on my face, hair, feet, rub it all over me, won't wash it off so I smell of you all day. Dominate me, rule me, control me, don't take any shit off me, make me shut up, put your cock in my mouth, down my throat, make me gag, do it some more. Gonna claw you, sink my nails into you, pretend to try and stop you so it makes you angry and you hurt me some more. Might pretend I don't want it so you fuck me even harder. Do what you want with me, make me yours. Make sure everyone else knows I'm your property, that I belong to you." This shocking letter is sent from a female probation officer to an IPP prisoner, and this problem is endemic and widespread across the prison estate. It is therefore little wonder that the Oasis risk assessment of short tariff vulnerable post tariff IPPs detained indefinitely for minor offences is a car crash.
Crime and Justice TV wanted to understand whether this state-sponsored endemic corruption, malpractice and gross misconduct exposed within the probation service was independent of other state-controlled institutions responsible for the ongoing death count, blood and lifelong trauma attributed to IPP. Crime and Justice TV investigated.
Crime and Justice TV has gained access to parole board documents which evidence shocking revelations. The IPP in question was subject to recall and was a short tariff IPP, 10 years over tariff. After months and months of waiting, the IPP finally attended a parole board hearing, and the chair of the hearing was parole board member Glyn Hibbard. Glyn Hibbard of the parole board refused to proceed with the hearing and instead adjourned the hearing and documented in her directions paperwork the reasons for adjourning the hearing were due to multiple rape allegations faced by the IPP prisoner, despite the fact that the IPP prisoner had never been accused of rape. When the IPP in question asked a forensic psychologist later on as to why a parole board member with so much experience would write such disgusting content, the IPP prisoner was told by the forensic psychologist that this was done so due to the post-war boys political climate and was done to keep the IPP prisoner in prison. The IPP prisoner then pursued multiple complaints to Professor Nick Hardwick of the Parole Board, the Parole Board Senior Complaints Reviewer, the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman, and his local MP, and all either ignored the complainant or decided that the complaint would not be upheld and the content that Glyn Hibbard of the Parole Board wrote as the reasons to adjourn the hearing would remain in the dossier. Again, this problem was endemic across the entire IPP estate and remains endemic post-John Warboys. Vulnerable short tariff, post-tariff IPP prisoners detained 10 years over their tariff for minor offences. Upon reading such incredible, disgusting things written about them that are not true, are dealing with it by killing themselves. Crime and Justice TV has exposed the parole board for corruption. The parole board adjourn routinely parole board hearings for short tariff, post-tariff IPPs and make up sex allegations against them without there ever being any victims to keep them in custody. The parole board then instructs forensic psychologists on behalf of the parole board and the Ministry of Justice to assess the IPP prisoners. Good quality reports written to the best of the ability, expertise and skills of the professionals writing them are critical for the progression of IPP prisoners. In accordance with the British Psychological Society Ethical Codes of Practice, forensic psychologists must strive for the highest standards of service to the parole board by way of preparation, investigation and good quality reports. Poor quality reports violate ethics, hinder progression for IPPs already multiple years over tariff, cause delays and ultimately contribute to A, the continued barbaric nature of the IPP sentence, and B, the continuing major loss of life attributed to IPP. Yet despite this, in the images here we can see that a forensic psychologist report written by independent forensic psychologist Yvonne Schell, instructed by the Ministry of Justice and the Parole Board, The 35-page document, which was completed after only seeing the short tariff IPP for 20 minutes, the document is littered with inaccuracy after inaccuracy after inaccuracy. The forensic psychologist claims, for example, that the IPP had a poor work history despite having a 6-year work history in the time that he was out working for some of the biggest hospitality companies in the country. There was 45 inaccuracies within the document. The IPP prisoner put together a comprehensive dossier with evidence to prove that the inaccuracies were false and sent them to the Healthcare Professionals Council, who are responsible for monitoring forensic psychologists who are BPS registered. The HCPC refused to accept the evidence and instead refused to uphold the complaint, therefore condemning the IPP to a report which was false, inaccurate and corrupt, endorsing continuing state-sponsored IPP killings of vulnerable IPPs with learning difficulties, with no accountability whatsoever, because the HCPC endorsed these corrupt reports. Again, this problem is endemic across the entire IPP estate, and there is nothing any IPP can do about it, and as a result, they are killing themselves. In a recent report published this week by Chair of the Justice Select Committee and the IPP Death Squad, Bob Neal MP, Bob Neal again refuses to address the modern-day massacre and IPP death machine that is IPP. And this is despite Bob Neal and his select committee hearing evidence from family members of now deceased IPPs. The state continues to cover up this modern-day massacre and the entrenched endemic corruption that continues to cause major loss of life for short tariff vulnerable IPPs with learning difficulties.
Crime and Justice TV has today exposed state-sponsored endemic corruption, active, rife and thriving at the Parole Board for England and Wales, led by Caroline Corby, the National Probation Service, led by Sonia Crozier, within the Justice Select Committee, led by Tory MP Bob Neal, and within the HCPC, led by Christine Elliott. All white, all upper class, all leading predominantly white upper-class top-tier staffing systems contributing to the biggest and worst mass miscarriage of justice in modern European political and criminal justice history, IPP. All contributing day in, day out, 7 days a week to an ocean of blood, immeasurable mass human suffering, trauma and an IPP death count that continues to rise month on month. And finally, this week, a man has been arrested in Edmonton, North London, for a series of random stabbings. Victims were approached and stabbed at random in Edmonton, North London. Jason Kekere, 29, from Cameron Close, Edmonton, has been charged with 5 counts of attempted murder after 5 random stabbings occurred within only a 4-day time frame. How can it be that in modern day 21st century Great Britain, when we send rockets to Mars, that a random knife attacker can evade police presence over and over in a small vicinity 5 times?
In these images, we can see that a random knife attacker was able to attack victims at random and evade police capture and evade police presence again and again and again in a very small area of North London. How can this be in modern 21st century Britain, where we have satellites in orbit and we are sending rockets to Mars? Police response times for violent crime are very, very poor in modern 21st century Britain. In some cases, Crime and Justice TV has observed that it can take even days for 999 calls to respond. Days, not minutes, days. Modern thinkers will accept the very fact and reality that modern police forces have in no way, shape or form kept up to date with the phenomenal advances in artificial intelligence. Modern police forces across the capital and across the United Kingdom will accept that drones can rapidly respond to violent attacks and violent crime all across the nation rapidly, and state-of-the-art close-up cameras can guide police on the ground to the perpetrator.
And that's it from this week's Crime and Justice TV Weekly Bulletin. I'm Pep Watson. This is Crime and Justice TV. I wish you all good health, prosperity, joy and blessings, and may you love by recognising yourself in others.